The wildlife enforcement officer's hand froze mid-reach for his tranquilizer gun, his breath catching as 30 pounds of golden-eyed muscle positioned itself protectively between him and the trembling 76-year-old woman on the porch. This wasn't supposed to be a standoff with a family pet. The three Maine Coons flanking the massive Bobcat like sentries confirmed what Officer Jake Crawford had refused to believe in the reports. This wild predator had chosen domesticity, chosen them. His radio crackled with urgent voices, demanding updates, while neighbors pressed against police barriers, some shouting, "Save Ridge!" others screaming, "Protect our children!" The elderly woman's weathered hands reached down to stroke the bobcat's tufted ears, her voice barely a whisper against the chaos. "They want to take my grandson away, Ridge." Crawford's finger hovered over the trigger, remembering his own son's lifeless body. How had 3 years of hidden love led to this moment of impossible choice? And would anyone survive the decision he was about to make? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Morrison-Torres family had never planned to become outlaws. 3 years earlier, their biggest worry was making ends meet in the modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, where 4 generations somehow made love stretch further than money ever could. Ethel Morrison, 76 and widowed, lived in the converted garage apartment behind the main house. Her Social Security check of $1,200 barely covered her medications, but she'd rather eat beans every night than burden her family. The former elementary school teacher still kept children's drawings taped to her refrigerator, faded reminders of 30 years spent nurturing other people's babies, while her own 4 children scattered across the country like dandelion seeds. "Love don't come with instructions, honey," she'd tell anyone who'd listen, though these days fewer people did. Her grandson Michael Torres, 34, inherited more than his grandfather's calloused hands. He'd inherited the family's stubborn streak and a failing auto repair shop that hemorrhaged money faster than a cracked radiator. Torres Motors sat on the wrong side of town, where people paid in installments and sometimes not at all. His monthly income of $2,800 disappeared into mortgage payments, utilities, and the endless appetite of old machinery. Michael's wife, Sarah, brought home $3,200 monthly from her night shifts at Denver General, but the money couldn't fill the emptiness left by the car accident 5 years ago. The drunk driver had taken more than her ability to bear children. He'd stolen her dreams of soccer games, school plays, and goodnight kisses. At 32, Sarah redirected her maternal instincts toward every injured creature that crossed their path, much to their veterinary bill's detriment. Frank Torres, 68, had returned 2 years ago like a prodigal father seeking redemption. The Vietnam veteran's $1,100 disability check came with nightmares and guilt that no amount of therapy could completely silence. He'd abandoned Michael when the boy was 8 and now lived in the converted tool shed, grateful for a second chance he wasn't sure he deserved. The house itself told their story. 3 generations crammed into spaces meant for one, sharing meals around a kitchen table held together with wood glue and hope. The mortgage was $3,000 behind, the roof leaked during heavy rains, and the furnace wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. But somehow they made it work. Ethel taught neighborhood kids to read on her front porch. Michael fixed cars for single mothers at cost. Sarah brought home medical supplies for anyone who needed them. Frank quietly repaired neighbors' fences and never asked for payment. They were the kind of family that measured wealth in Sunday dinners and shared laughter, where love was demonstrated through small sacrifices nobody else noticed. Their house sat in a neighborhood caught between gentrification and decay, where working families like theirs watched nervously as property values climbed beyond their reach. None of them could have predicted that their greatest test would come in the form of 6 pounds of spotted fur with golden eyes found shivering beside a Colorado highway on a night when everything changed forever. 3 years ago, Michael Torres drove Highway 34 through the Colorado mountains with the weight of another failed job interview pressing down on his shoulders like a lead blanket. The regional manager at AutoZone had taken one look at his worn work boots and 10-year-old resume and delivered the familiar verdict with practiced indifference. "We'll call you if something opens up." The October snow fell early that year, coating the asphalt in a treacherous glaze that matched Michael's mood. His truck's heater wheezed as pathetically as their bank account, and the gas gauge hovered dangerously close to empty. $3,000 behind on the mortgage, with Sarah working double shifts just to keep the lights on. Michael felt like he was drowning in slow motion. That's when he saw the movement in the roadside ditch. At first, he thought it was a discarded trash bag caught in the wind. But something made him slow down, some instinct honed by years of finding abandoned animals on rural roads. The headlights caught a flash of spotted fur, and Michael's heart clenched as he recognized the unmistakable form of a tiny bobcat kitten no bigger than his fist, shivering beside the motionless body of what could only be its mother. "Jesus," he whispered, pulling onto the shoulder with hands that suddenly trembled. The mother bobcat lay crumpled 50 yards away, her beautiful coat stained dark with blood. Fresh tire tracks and scattered glass told the story. Another casualty of Colorado's endless development pushing wildlife into fatal contact with human progress. But somehow, impossibly, her baby had survived. Michael approached slowly, expecting the kitten to bolt into the forest. Instead, those enormous golden eyes locked onto his with an intensity that stopped him cold. The little creature was beyond fear, beyond flight. It was simply waiting to see if this giant meant rescue or death. "Hey there, little guy," Michael murmured, crouching down. "Where's your family?" The kitten's response was a weak mewl that sounded heartbreakingly like a question. "Are you my family now?" Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Any luck with the interview? We need good news." Looking at the dying kitten, Michael realized good news sometimes came disguised as the worst possible timing. He shrugged off his jacket, the same worn Carhartt he'd inherited from his grandfather, and gently scooped up 6 pounds of trembling possibility. The drive home blurred past in a haze of adrenaline and second-guessing. Every rational part of Michael's brain screamed that they couldn't afford another mouth to feed, couldn't handle another responsibility. But the kitten's trusting weight against his chest felt like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known he was praying. Sarah met them at the door, still in her scrubs from the hospital. One look at the bundle in Michael's arms erased any lecture about practicality. Her nursing instincts kicked in immediately, checking for injuries, assessing dehydration, calculating medication dosages with the precision that made her invaluable to the emergency room. "Infected wound on the hind leg," she diagnosed, gently probing the swollen tissue. "Severely malnourished, probably hasn't eaten in days. But he's a fighter." Ethel emerged from her apartment like a grandmother summoned by cosmic forces, taking one look at the kitten and declaring with absolute certainty, "That baby chose us, not the other way around." Even Frank, initially skeptical, found himself drawn to the little creature's quiet dignity. "Wild things belong in the wild," he muttered, but his calloused fingers were surprisingly gentle as he helped construct a makeshift bed from old towels. They named him Ridge, after the mountain peaks visible from their kitchen window, and spent the first week expecting him to die. Instead, he defied every prediction. Under Sarah's careful nursing and Ethel's constant attention, Ridge not only survived, but began to thrive with a determination that bordered on miraculous. The veterinarian, Dr. James McKinley, confirmed what they'd all suspected but hadn't dared voice. Ridge wasn't just any wild kitten. He was a North American bobcat, a species that typically avoided human contact and certainly didn't domesticate. But Ridge seemed unaware of these biological imperatives. He bonded with each family member individually and absolutely, as if he'd been waiting his entire 6 weeks of life for exactly this family. By Christmas, Ridge had integrated so completely into their household that visitors assumed he was simply an unusually large house cat. He played with Ethel's knitting yarn, slept curled against Sarah's feet, and followed Michael around the garage like a spotted shadow. When the 3 Maine Coon Kittens, Thunder, Storm, and Aspen, arrived as Sarah's birthday surprise, Ridge appointed himself their protector and teacher with the seriousness of a drill sergeant. The family made a collective, unspoken decision. Ridge's true nature would remain their secret. They told neighbors he was a Maine Coon mix rescue, and Dr. McKinley, moved by the obvious love between animal and family, agreed to maintain that fiction in his records. For 3 years, it worked perfectly. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by a postal worker who seemed far too cheerful for the magnitude of what he carried. Michael's name appeared in elegant script across cream-colored envelope, bearing the letterhead of Morrison, Sterling Associates, Attorneys at Law. "Probably another collection notice," Sarah muttered, but something about the envelope's weight suggested otherwise. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he tore it open, expecting another demand for payment they couldn't afford. Instead, he found himself staring at words that made no sense. "We regret to inform you of the passing of Clayton Torres, your paternal grandfather, and are pleased to notify you that you have been named as the primary beneficiary of his estate, valued at approximately $2.5 million. The coffee mug slipped from Sarah's fingers, shattering against the kitchen linoleum in an explosion of ceramic and caffeine. "What did you just say?" Michael read the letter 3 times before the reality penetrated his shock. Clayton Torres, the grandfather who'd disappeared from their lives when Michael was 12, the man Frank claimed had disowned them all, had not only died wealthy but had remembered the grandson he'd never really known. But wealth, they quickly learned, came with conditions that felt like landmines. The inheritance was structured as a trust with one crucial stipulation: Michael must live lawfully and morally for 1 full year following Clayton's death, with any legal infractions resulting in complete forfeiture of the funds. The lawyer's follow-up call made the terms crystal clear. Even minor violations, traffic tickets, permit infractions, housing code violations would void the entire inheritance. "Your grandfather was very specific," Attorney Morrison explained during their meeting at his downtown office. "He believed money should only go to those who prove themselves worthy through their choices, not their circumstances." Michael sat in the leather chair, acutely aware of his worn work clothes in the pristine office, while Sarah gripped his hand so tightly her knuckles went white. $2.5 million would solve every problem they'd ever had. They could pay off the mortgage, expand the garage, maybe even start the family. Sarah had always dreamed of through adoption, but Ridge made that inheritance illegal. Colorado law was unforgiving when it came to exotic pets. Bobcats were classified as dangerous wildlife, requiring special permits that cost thousands of dollars and met requirements their property could never satisfy. Possessing Ridge without proper documentation was a Class 1 misdemeanor, punishable by fines up to $5,000 and up to 18 months in jail. The irony was suffocating. Ridge's presence in their lives represented exactly the kind of lawlessness that would cost them their financial salvation. "We could apply for the permits," Sarah suggested during one of their late-night kitchen table discussions. "Maybe explain the circumstances." Frank shook his head grimly. "Bureaucrats don't care about circumstances. They care about regulations. Ethel, who'd been quietly listening while Ridge dozed in her lap, finally spoke. "What if we found him a good home? Somewhere he could live legally?" The suggestion hung in the air like a physical weight. Ridge chose that moment to stretch, his massive paws extending as he adjusted his position against Ethel's chest. His purr rumbled through the quiet kitchen. Not the delicate trill of a house cat, but the deep, thrumming sound of a wild heart that had learned to trust. "We can't just give him away," Michael said, his voice rougher than intended. "He's family." But the pressure began building immediately. Every day brought new reminders of their precarious situation. The mortgage company sent increasingly urgent notices. The garage's ancient hydraulic lift finally died, a repair that would cost more than they had. Sarah's car needed transmission work they couldn't afford. Meanwhile, Ridge seemed oblivious to the chaos his very existence created. At 3 years old, he'd grown into 30 pounds of pure muscle and intelligence, his spotted coat gleaming with health, his golden eyes missing nothing. He'd developed routines that revolved around each family member's schedule, waking Ethel each morning with gentle head bumps, greeting Michael at the garage door every evening, curling up beside Sarah when her night shift stress became overwhelming. The Maine Coons, Thunder, Storm, and Aspen had long since accepted Ridge as their pack leader. Where he went, they followed. His hunting skills had rubbed off on them, though they lacked his lethal precision. His protective instincts extended to all of them, but especially to Ethel, whom he seemed to consider his special responsibility. Dr. Patricia Whitfield noticed the changes first. The wealthy veterinarian, who lived 3 blocks away in the neighborhood's most expensive house, had always been observant, perhaps too observant for everyone's comfort. She'd moved to Colorado 5 years earlier after losing her medical license in California, seeking what she called a fresh start in a community where her past remained unknown. "That's an unusually large cat," she mentioned to Sarah at the grocery store one afternoon, her tone carefully casual. "Very distinctive markings." Sarah's response was equally careful. "He's a Maine Coon mix. You know how big they can get." But Dr. Whitfield's eyes held a skepticism that made Sarah's stomach clench with worry. The woman had clearly done her research on cat breeds, and Ridge's appearance didn't match any domestic lineage, no matter how creative the mixing. Other signs of exposure began accumulating like storm clouds. Ridge's territorial instincts had intensified with maturity, leading to confrontations with neighborhood dogs that drew unwanted attention. His nocturnal vocalizations, not quite meows, not quite roars, carried further than anyone realized. Security cameras mounted by cautious neighbors occasionally captured glimpses of Ridge's distinctive silhouette prowling their backyard. The inheritance deadline loomed with mathematical precision, 11 months and 17 days to prove Michael's worthiness through perfect legal compliance. 11 months and 17 days to choose between the family they'd rescued and the future they'd never dared dream possible. The first sign that their carefully constructed secret was unraveling came on a humid August morning when Ridge saved Emma Whitfield's life. 8-year-old Emma had been chasing her escaped hamster along Willow Creek, the shallow stream that meandered behind the neighborhood's backyards. What started as a simple rescue mission turned deadly when the recent thunderstorms had swollen the creek beyond its usual gentle babble into a rushing torrent that could easily overwhelm a small child. Emma's foot slipped on the moss-covered rocks, and suddenly she was underwater, her pink jacket disappearing beneath the muddy current. Her screams were swallowed by the roar of rushing water as she tumbled toward the concrete culvert that would trap her beneath the subdivision's main road. Ridge heard the distress before any human could react. 30 pounds of muscle and instinct launched from the Tora's backyard, crashing through Mrs. Rodriguez's flower bed and sailing over the creek bank in a fluid arc that spoke of millions of years of predatory evolution. He hit the water with precision, his powerful legs driving him downstream faster than the current could carry Emma's small body. When Dr. Patricia Whitfield reached the creek, gasping and sobbing, she found her daughter clinging to a fallen log while a massive spotted cat held her jacket in his teeth, preventing the current from sweeping her away. Ridge's golden eyes met the veterinarian's for one electric moment before he released Emma into her mother's reaching arms and melted back into the underbrush like smoke. "Mommy," Emma gasped, water streaming from her hair. "The big kitty saved me, just like in the movies." Dr. Whitfield held her daughter with shaking hands, her medical training warring with the impossible reality of what she'd witnessed. The creature that had saved Emma's life was no domestic cat, no matter how creative the breeding. Those distinctive ear tufts, the proportions of the skull, the way it moved through water, every detail screamed bobcat with unmistakable clarity. But instead of gratitude, Dr. Whitfield felt a cold dread settling in her chest. Her past haunted her like a persistent shadow, particularly the malpractice lawsuit that had ended her career in California. She'd lost everything because she'd ignored warning signs, dismissed concerns as overreaction, and a child had nearly died because of her professional negligence. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Over the following weeks, Dr. Whitfield began her investigation with the methodical precision that had once made her a competent physician. She installed a high-definition security camera system around her property, angled to capture activity in the Tora's backyard. She began documenting Ridge's behaviors, his size, his distinctive markings, building a case file with the dedication of someone seeking redemption through vigilance. The footage she captured was damning. Ridge hunting mice with lethal efficiency, his movements too fluid and predatory for any domestic breed. Ridge marking territory with scent markers no house cat would produce. Ridge's interaction with the Maine Coons revealing a clear hierarchy that spoke of pack behavior rather than typical feline social structures. But most concerning was Ridge's protective behavior around Ethel Morrison. Dr. Whitfield watched hours of footage showing the massive cat shadowing the elderly woman, positioning himself between her and any perceived threats, including delivery drivers and visiting neighbors. While touching, in its devotion, the behavior suggested territorial instincts that could turn dangerous without warning. Dr. Whitfield's 8-year-old daughter Emma complicated her mother's growing campaign against Ridge. The child had developed what could only be described as hero worship for the big kitty who saved me. She drew pictures of Ridge, begged to visit the Torres family, and spoke endlessly about how he's the goodest cat in the whole world. "Honey," Dr. Whitfield explained carefully one evening, "wild animals can be unpredictable, even when they seem friendly." Emma's response was immediate and fierce. "Ridge isn't wild. He's Ethel's grandson." The innocence of that statement cut through Dr. Whitfield's certainty like a scalpel. Emma had absorbed the family's fiction so completely that Ridge's true nature seemed irrelevant compared to his chosen role. But Dr. Whitfield couldn't shake the memory of the malpractice case, the parents who'd trusted her judgment, the child who'd suffered because she'd failed to act on concerning symptoms. Meanwhile, Ridge's behavior was changing in ways that worried even his devoted family. As he matured, his territorial instincts intensified. The backyard became his domain in ways that extended beyond typical pet ownership. He marked boundaries, patrolled perimeters, and showed increasing aggression toward other male cats who dared enter what he considered his territory. During mating season, Ridge's vocalizations became impossible to ignore. His calls weren't the melodic yowling of domestic cats, but deeper, more primitive sounds that carried for blocks. Neighbors began asking questions about that strange cat that seemed to sing at 3 in the morning. Michael and Sarah found themselves constantly managing Ridge's increasing wildness while maintaining the fiction of his domestic origins. They invested in expensive soundproofing for the garage apartment where Ridge spent his nights. They built an elaborate enclosed run in their backyard, disguised as a catio for their special needs rescue cat. But Ridge's intelligence worked against their deception. He seemed to understand when strangers were watching, becoming more reserved and domestic in his behavior. Yet his authentic, wild nature asserted itself in moments of stress or excitement, revealing the predator beneath the beloved pet facade. The inheritance pressure added another layer of stress to their increasingly fragile situation. Every month brought reminders from the attorney about the behavior clause, each one feeling more like a countdown to Judgment Day. Sarah researched exotic pet laws in other states, desperately seeking somewhere they could relocate legally with Ridge. Texas, surprisingly, had more permissive laws, but the logistics of moving seemed impossible given their financial constraints. Frank offered a heartbreaking solution during one of their kitchen table crisis meetings. "I could take Ridge and leave Colorado, live off the grid somewhere until this inheritance business is settled." The offer hung in the air like incense, heavy with sacrifice. Frank's relationship with Michael had finally healed after years of estrangement, and the old veteran had found peace in their multi-generational household. Volunteering to exile himself with Ridge would mean giving up his second chance at family. "No," Ethel said firmly, Ridge curled in her lap like 30 pounds of spotted contentment. "We don't split up family to solve problems. We figure it out together." But figuring it out seemed increasingly impossible as Dr. Whitfield's campaign gained momentum. She began attending city council meetings, raising concerns about dangerous animals in residential neighborhoods. She organized meetings with concerned parents, showing carefully edited footage of Ridge's size and predatory behaviors while omitting context about his gentle interactions with the family. The neighborhood began dividing into camps. Supporters of the Torres family included Mrs. Rodriguez, whose life Ridge had arguably saved during her heart attack when his insistent yowling had awakened Michael in time to call paramedics. Tommy Chen, the 10-year-old from across the street, started a petition to save Ridge with the fierce dedication only children could muster. Reverend William Hayes from the Methodist Church spoke eloquently about love transcending species boundaries. But opposition was growing among the newer, wealthier residents who saw property values and safety as more important than sentiment. Anonymous tips began flowing to animal control services. Social media groups formed around hashtags like #WildAnimals, #Aren'tPets, and #ProtectOurChildren. Officer Jake Crawford of Colorado Parks and Wildlife found himself caught in the middle of an increasingly volatile situation. The reports about an illegal bobcat in a residential neighborhood couldn't be ignored, but something about the case troubled him deeply. Most illegal exotic pet situations involved obvious negligence or exploitation. The Torres family, by contrast, seemed genuinely devoted to their animals' welfare. Crawford's own history made the case particularly painful. 5 years earlier, his 12-year-old son Tyler had died from a venomous snake bite. The snake had been illegally owned by a neighbor who'd assured everyone it was completely safe and just like a pet. Crawford's marriage hadn't survived the tragedy, and his ex-wife's final words still echoed in his mind. "You followed protocol instead of protecting our son." Now he faced another protocol decision that could destroy a family, but this time the animal in question seemed genuinely domesticated despite its wild origins. Crawford's preliminary investigations revealed a bobcat that had never shown aggression toward humans, lived peacefully with domestic cats, and displayed obvious affection for its adoptive family. The inheritance deadline cast everything in stark relief. With 6 months remaining, Michael faced an impossible calculation: surrender Ridge and claim financial security for his family, or choose love over money and risk losing everything they'd worked for. Late at night, when Ridge patrolled the backyard and the Maine Coons shadowed his movements like devoted disciples, Michael would stand at the kitchen window and wonder what his grandfather Clayton would have truly wanted. Did living lawfully and morally mean following regulations regardless of context? Or did it mean honoring commitments to those who depended on you? The answer seemed to change depending on whether he was looking at their mounting bills or Ridge's trusting golden eyes. The confrontation exploded on a Friday morning in October when Dr. Patricia Whitfield arrived at Michael's garage with her daughter Emma and a manila folder thick with evidence. "We need to talk," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Emma hung back beside her mother's Mercedes, clutching a crayon drawing of Ridge that she'd made at school. Michael emerged from beneath a rusted Chevy, his hands black with grease, and immediately recognized the look in Dr. Whitfield's eyes. He'd seen it before in the faces of customers who'd discovered he'd been honest about repair costs, the expression of someone preparing to deliver bad news they believed was justified. "I know what Ridge really is," Dr. Whitfield said without preamble, opening the folder to reveal months of surveillance photos. "These images show clear evidence of bobcat characteristics, ear tufts, facial structure, body proportions, hunting behaviors. You're harboring an illegal exotic animal in a residential neighborhood." The photographs were damning in their clarity. Ridge stalking through tall grass with the fluid precision of a born predator. Ridge's distinctive spotted coat patterns that no domestic breeding could produce. Ridge's golden eyes reflecting camera flash with the telltale tapetum lucidum of a wild feline. Michael's mouth went dry as he flipped through the evidence, each image feeling like a nail in Ridge's coffin. "Dr. Whitfield, I understand your concerns, but—" "My concerns?" Her voice rose sharply. "Mr. Torres, I lost my medical license because I failed to act on warning signs. I will not make that mistake again. That animal poses a clear and present danger to this community." Emma stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Mommy, Ridge saved me from drowning. He's not dangerous." Dr. Whitfield's composure cracked slightly. "Honey, wild animals can be unpredictable, even when they seem friendly." "But he is friendly," Emma protested, holding up her drawing. "He's the nicest cat in the whole world." Michael seized the moment of vulnerability. "Dr. Whitfield, Ridge has lived with us for 3 years. He's never shown aggression toward anyone. He's gentle with children, protective of elderly people, and he lives peacefully with our other cats. Doesn't that behavior matter more than his genetics?" "Behavior can change without warning," Dr. Whitfield replied, but her conviction seemed to waver, especially during mating season or when territorial instincts are triggered. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Officer Jake Crawford, his Colorado Parks and Wildlife vehicle pulling into the garage's parking area with deliberate slowness. Crawford emerged from his truck with the measured movements of someone who'd had too many conversations like this one. "Dr. Whitfield," he nodded politely. "Mr. Torres, I received your complaint this morning." Dr. Whitfield straightened, finding her professional composure again. "Officer Crawford, I've documented extensive evidence of illegal bobcat possession. The situation requires immediate intervention." Crawford accepted the folder but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he studied Michael's face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read people under pressure. "Mr. Torres, I'll need to inspect the animal in question. Is the owner present?" "My grandmother is at home with Ridge," Michael said carefully. "But Officer Crawford, before you make any decisions, I hope you'll consider the full context of the situation." The drive to Maple Street felt like a funeral procession. Crawford followed Michael's truck while Dr. Whitfield brought up the rear in her Mercedes, Emma's face pressed against the window, her eyes wide with confusion and worry. Ethel was waiting on the front porch when they arrived, Ridge sitting calmly beside her wheelchair, his massive frame alert but relaxed. Thunder, Storm, and Aspen arranged themselves around Ridge like a living fortress, their blue eyes watching the approaching strangers with feline wariness. Crawford's professional demeanor faltered slightly as he took in the scene. Whatever he'd expected to find, it wasn't this peaceful tableau of multi-generational family harmony. Ridge's size was undeniably impressive, but his body language spoke of contentment rather than threat. "Mrs. Morrison," Crawford said respectfully, "I'm Officer Crawford with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I need to examine your cat." Ethel's weathered hand rested on Ridge's head, her fingers gently stroking his ear tufts. "This is my grandson Ridge," she said with quiet dignity. "He's been part of our family for 3 years." Ridge's response to Crawford's approach was curious rather than defensive. He stood slowly, stretching his powerful frame, and padded forward to investigate the stranger. His golden eyes assessed Crawford with obvious intelligence, taking in the uniform, the equipment, the man's scent and posture. Crawford found himself face to face with 30 pounds of apex predator who showed no fear, no aggression, only calm interest. Ridge's behavior was unlike any wild bobcat Crawford had encountered in 15 years of wildlife enforcement. This animal moved with the confidence of a creature that knew itself to be safe and beloved. "He's beautiful," Crawford admitted, his professional mask slipping, "and remarkably calm." Emma Whitfield had somehow escaped her mother's oversight and was now kneeling beside Ridge, her small hands buried in his spotted fur. "See, Mommy? He remembers me. He's purring." Dr. Whitfield's carefully constructed arguments began crumbling as she watched her daughter interact with the dangerous predator she'd been campaigning against. Ridge's purr was indeed audible, a deep, thrumming sound that spoke of contentment and trust. When Emma giggled and pressed her face against his neck, Ridge remained perfectly still, accepting her affection with the patience of a saint. Sarah arrived home from her morning shift at the hospital, immediately assessing the situation with a nurse's trained eye for crisis management. She took in the official vehicle, Dr. Whitfield's tense posture, and Emma's obvious distress. "Officer Crawford," Sarah said calmly, "would you like to see Ridge's medical records? Dr. McKinley has been his veterinarian since we found him as an injured kitten." Crawford nodded, grateful for any information that might help him navigate this increasingly complex situation. The medical files painted a picture of an animal that had been lovingly cared for, regularly vaccinated, and monitored for any signs of behavioral problems. Dr. McKinley's notes consistently described Ridge as gentle, intelligent, and well socialized. Frank Torres emerged from his garage apartment, moving slowly but purposefully toward the gathering crowd. His presence seemed to change the dynamics immediately. A veteran's bearing commanded respect even in civilian clothes. "Officer," Frank said with military directness, "that animal saved my daughter-in-law's life during her heart attack 6 months ago. His howling woke the whole neighborhood in time for us to get help. And he saved my daughter from drowning," Dr. Whitfield admitted reluctantly, her voice barely audible. Crawford found himself in an impossible position. The law was clear. Bobcats required special permits and facilities that this family obviously didn't possess. But the reality before him challenged everything he thought he knew about wildlife management and public safety. "I need to make some calls," Crawford said finally. "This situation requires consultation with my supervisors." As he stepped away to use his radio, the assembled group fell into uncomfortable silence. Ridge seemed oblivious to the tension, contentedly accepting attention from Emma while keeping one golden eye on Ethel to ensure she remained safe. Dr. Whitfield watched her daughter's interaction with Ridge, memories of the malpractice case warring with the evidence before her eyes. The child who'd nearly died because of her medical negligence had been about Emma's age. She'd spent 5 years overcompensating for that failure, seeing danger everywhere, trusting nothing to chance. But Ridge's gentle acceptance of Emma's enthusiastic petting challenged every assumption she'd made about wild animals and public safety. This creature had saved her daughter's life, then accepted her gratitude with the grace of a true gentleman. "Mrs. Morrison," Dr. Whitfield said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I've been operating from fear rather than facts." Ethel's response was immediate and warm. "Honey, fear makes us all do things we regret later. What matters is having the courage to change course when we realize we've been wrong." Crawford returned from his radio consultation with an expression that revealed nothing. "I've spoken with my district supervisor and the state wildlife veterinarian. Given the unusual circumstances of this case, we're prepared to offer a conditional solution." The family held their collective breath. "Ridge can remain with your family under a special educational permit. He would be classified as a wildlife education ambassador with regular behavioral assessments and specific conditions for his care. The permit would require community service, school visits, educational programs, public outreach about wildlife conservation." Michael felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. "What about the inheritance issue?" Crawford looked confused. "What inheritance issue?" Dr. Whitfield stepped forward. "Officer Crawford, this family is facing legal compliance requirements related to a significant inheritance. Ridge's status as an illegal exotic pet could void their claim to the money." Crawford's expression darkened. "Are you telling me this family might lose their financial security because they rescued an injured animal and gave it a loving home?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Dr. Whitfield replied, her voice heavy with newfound understanding. The officer studied the family with new eyes. Their worn clothing, the obvious signs of financial struggle, the way they'd chosen love over money for 3 years. His own loss came flooding back. The son who died because someone else had prioritized selfish desires over public safety. But this situation was different. This family had given everything for an animal that had given them everything in return. "The educational permit takes effect immediately," Crawford announced. "As far as the state is concerned, Ridge has been legally owned since today." Emma Whitfield threw her arms around Ridge's neck, her tears of relief dampening his spotted fur. "You get to stay! You get to stay with your family!" Ridge's purr deepened as he accepted the celebration, his golden eyes moving from face to face, somehow understanding that the crisis had passed. Thunder, Storm, and Aspen emerged from their protective formation, rubbing against their adoptive brother with obvious relief. But even as the immediate threat receded, everyone present understood that their victory was fragile. Public opinion, legal challenges, and bureaucratic changes could still threaten Ridge's future with the only family he'd ever known. The real test would be whether their love could withstand the scrutiny that was about to descend upon them. The educational permit that had seemed like salvation quickly revealed itself as a double-edged sword wrapped in bureaucratic red tape. Within a week of Officer Crawford's announcement, the Torres family found themselves thrust into a spotlight they'd never wanted, their private struggle transformed into a public spectacle that threatened to destroy everything they'd fought to protect. The first blow came from an unexpected source: the inheritance attorney himself. Morrison, Sterling Associates, had received an anonymous tip about Michael's illegal exotic pet situation, and were now conducting their own investigation into whether the family had violated the moral behavior clause during the 3 years before Ridge's permit was issued. "The trust documents are very specific," Attorney Morrison explained during an emergency conference call that left Michael's hands shaking. "Any period of illegal activity, even if subsequently legitimized, constitutes a violation of your grandfather's requirements." Sarah sat beside Michael at their kitchen table, watching 3 years of hope crumble into legal technicalities. "But Ridge is legal now. The state has approved his educational permit." "Mrs. Torres, the permit addresses future compliance, not past violations. Our preliminary investigation suggests your family knowingly harbored an illegal exotic animal for 3 years. That behavior cannot be retroactively legitimized." The attorney's words hung in the air like a death sentence. $2.5 million, enough to secure their family's future for generations, slipping away because they'd chosen love over law. But the inheritance crisis paled compared to the media storm that erupted once local news stations discovered the story. Family fights to keep illegal bobcat became the headline that launched 1,000 opinion pieces, each one reducing their complex reality to simplistic talking points. Television crews camped outside their house, their satellite trucks blocking the narrow street, while reporters thrust microphones at anyone willing to comment. The story went viral on social media, spawning hashtags that turned their family's pain into digital entertainment. Save Ridge versus Wild Animals Aren't Pets. Love Has No Species versus Law and Order. Ethel bore the worst of the invasion. Reporters knocked on her door at all hours, asking for interviews about her dangerous pet. Strangers drove by their house taking photos, some supportive but others clearly hostile. The stress triggered her first serious heart episode in 2 years, landing her in the emergency room where Sarah worked. "This is killing her," Sarah told Michael as they sat in the hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning. "The stress is literally breaking her heart." Ridge seemed to sense the family's distress, his behavior becoming increasingly protective and agitated. He refused to leave Ethel's side when she returned from the hospital, positioning himself between her wheelchair and anyone who approached. His territorial instincts, always present but usually controlled, began asserting themselves more forcefully. The situation escalated when a group of animal rights activists arrived from Denver, setting up a protest camp in the park across from their house. Their signs read, "Wildlife belongs in the wild," and "Stop enslaving natural predators." But their presence attracted counter-protesters who supported the family's right to keep Ridge. The two groups faced off daily in increasingly heated confrontations that required police intervention. News crews captured every argument, every heated exchange, turning their quiet neighborhood into a battlefield of competing ideologies. Dr. Patricia Whitfield watched the chaos unfold with growing horror, realizing that her initial complaint had unleashed forces far beyond her control or intention. Emma came home from school crying daily, other children either treating her as a celebrity for knowing the famous cat or taunting her about her mother's role in trying to kill Ridge. "I never wanted this," Dr. Whitfield confessed to Sarah during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "I was trying to prevent tragedy, not create it." The breaking point came when someone, the identity was never determined, called in a bomb threat to Ridge's first scheduled educational presentation at Maple Elementary School. The threat was deemed non-credible, but the school district immediately canceled all future programs, effectively voiding the educational permit that had been Ridge's legal lifeline. Without the educational component, Ridge's permit became invalid. Colorado Parks and Wildlife issued a notice. The family had 48 hours to surrender the animal or face criminal prosecution. Michael found himself staring at the official document, the words blurring through his exhaustion and despair. 3 years of loving care reduced to a bureaucratic deadline. The inheritance lost to legal technicalities. Ethel's health failing under the stress. Their family's private joy transformed into public controversy. "Maybe we should have taken the money," he said to Sarah as they sat in their darkened living room, Ridge sleeping peacefully between thunder and storm, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. "And abandoned Ridge?" Sarah's voice was sharp with disbelief. "That would have killed Ethel faster than any stress." Frank emerged from his apartment, drawn by voices and unable to sleep through another night of worry. At 68, he'd survived Vietnam, divorce, and decades of self-imposed exile, but watching his family suffer felt worse than any personal pain he'd endured. "Son," Frank said quietly, "I made a lot of mistakes in my life. walked away from people I should have protected. But I learned something important. You can live with poverty, you can live with disappointment, but you can't live with betraying the ones who trust you completely. Ridge stirred at the sound of Frank's voice, opening one golden eye to assess the human emotions swirling around him. His tail twitched once, then settled again as he apparently decided the conversation posed no immediate threat to his family's safety. 48 hours, Michael repeated, the deadline echoing in his mind like a countdown to execution. Outside, the media crews prepared for what they anticipated would be a dramatic conclusion to the story that had captivated the nation. Would the family choose compliance with the law? Or would they become fugitives for the sake of a wild animal who had chosen domesticity? The answer would determine not only Ridge's fate, but the very soul of a family that had learned to measure wealth in purrs instead of dollars. The first revelation shattered everything Dr. Patricia Whitfield thought she knew about her own life. It came in the form of a manila envelope slipped under her door on the night before Ridge's surrender deadline, containing photocopied police reports and hunting permits that made her blood run cold. The documents revealed that her ex-husband, Marcus Whitfield, had been illegally hunting in the Colorado wilderness 3 years ago, specifically targeting bobcats for their pelts, despite having no proper permits. The hunting logs, written in Marcus's familiar handwriting, detailed his kills with sickening precision. Female bobcat, lactating, shot at dawn near Highway 34, pelt in good condition despite damage from truck impact afterward. The date matched exactly with the night Michael Torres had found Ridge. Doctor. Whitfield's hands trembled as she read the evidence of her ex-husband's crime. Marcus had shot Ridge's mother, then left the scene when he realized she had a kitten, abandoning the baby to die rather than face questions about his illegal hunting activities. The irony was suffocating. She had spent months trying to destroy the very animal who was orphaned by her own family's violence. The second document in the envelope was even more devastating. A coroner's report from 5 years earlier detailed the death of 12-year-old Tyler Crawford, son of wildlife officer Jake Crawford. The boy had died from the bite of an illegally owned gaboon viper, a snake that had been purchased from Marcus Whitfield during his brief, disastrous venture into exotic animal trafficking. Dr. Whitfield sank into her kitchen chair, the full weight of her ex-husband's criminal network finally becoming clear. Marcus hadn't just been an abusive husband and negligent father, he had been the connection between two tragedies that were now intersecting in ways that defied coincidence. Officer Crawford received his own envelope that same night, delivered by an unknown sender who understood the power of truth revealed at precisely the right moment. The documents contained evidence he'd been seeking for 5 years, proof that his son's death wasn't just a tragic accident, but the result of a criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity. Crawford sat in his truck outside the Torres house at dawn, watching the media circus prepare for what they assumed would be Ridge's final day with his family. The officer's radio crackled with requests for updates, his superiors demanding to know his timeline for enforcement, but Crawford couldn't bring himself to respond. His son Tyler had died because Crawford had followed protocol instead of investigating obvious warning signs. The exotic animal dealer who'd sold the snake had operated openly, but Crawford had assumed someone else was handling the investigation. His professional detachment had cost his son's life and destroyed his marriage. Now he faced another moment where protocol demanded action that would destroy an innocent family. But this time Crawford had evidence that the real criminal was Marcus Whitfield, not the family who'd rescued his victim. Crawford's phone rang with a call that changed everything. "Officer Crawford, this is Attorney Morrison from Morrison Sterling Associates. I have information about the Torres inheritance case that requires immediate attention." The attorney's revelation came like a thunderbolt. Clayton Torres had known about Ridge all along. The old man had hired private investigators to monitor his grandson's family, not to catch them in violations, but to ensure they were living according to his true values. Mr. Torres left specific instructions, Attorney Morrison explained, his voice heavy with the weight of delayed truth. The inheritance was never contingent on legal compliance in the traditional sense. It was designed to test whether Michael would choose love over money when forced to decide. The moral behavior clause specifically referenced caring for those who depend on you, regardless of legal technicalities. The grandfather's final letter, sealed and not to be opened until the crisis reached its peak, contained words that brought tears to the hardened attorney's eyes. Michael, if you're reading this, it means you've chosen family over fortune, love over law. That choice proves you're worthy of both. The money was always yours, but more importantly, you've shown you don't need money to be rich. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Emma Whitfield, playing in her backyard while her mother struggled with the evidence of Marcus's crimes, made a discovery that would reframe everything the adults thought they understood. Hidden in her old playhouse was a metal box containing Marcus's hunting journals from his time in Colorado. The entries revealed a man consumed with hatred for wildlife, seeing animals as obstacles to his vision of a perfectly controlled environment. But more disturbing were his notes about problem animals in residential neighborhoods, specifically mentioning the oversized cat at the Torres place and his plans to solve the problem permanently. Marcus had been planning to kill Ridge. Dr. Whitfield found her daughter reading the journals with the horrified fascination of a child discovering adult evil. "Daddy wanted to hurt Ridge," Emma said, her voice small and confused. "He wrote about it lots of times." The timeline became clear with sickening precision. Marcus's campaign against Ridge hadn't been about public safety, but personal vendetta. He had orchestrated the anonymous tips, the media attention, the legal pressure, all designed to force the family to surrender Ridge so he could eliminate the evidence of his original crime. Dr. Whitfield realized that her own complaints had been manipulated, her legitimate concerns about exotic pets twisted into weapons in her ex-husband's larger campaign of revenge. Marcus had fed her information, suggested legal strategies, even helped her install the surveillance cameras that captured Ridge's behavior. The final piece of the puzzle arrived when Officer Crawford received a call from his ex-wife, Linda, for the first time in 3 years. "Jake," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "I need to tell you something about Tyler's death. I've been carrying this guilt for 5 years, but I can't stay silent anymore." Linda's confession shattered Crawford's understanding of his son's death. Tyler hadn't been bitten while handling the snake carelessly, as everyone had assumed. He had been trying to return the animal to its cage after discovering it had escaped and was heading toward the neighbor's yard where small children played. "Our boy died trying to protect other kids," Linda sobbed. "He saw that snake loose and knew it could kill someone's baby. He risked his life to save children he didn't even know." The revelation that his son had died as a hero, not a victim of childish recklessness, broke something fundamental in Crawford's heart. Tyler had made the same choice the Torres family was making, protecting others at personal cost. As these revelations cascaded through the various parties, the deadline for Ridge's surrender approached with mathematical precision. Media crews positioned themselves for dramatic footage, protesters gathered with conflicting signs, and the Torres family prepared for what they assumed would be their final mourning with Ridge. But Ridge himself seemed oddly calm, as if he sensed that the storm was about to break in ways none of the humans could anticipate. He spent the morning moving methodically through his routine, checking on Ethel, supervising the Maine Coon's breakfast, patrolling the backyard perimeter one final time. At precisely 10 o'clock, as Officer Crawford was scheduled to arrive for enforcement, 3 vehicles pulled up to the Torres house simultaneously: Crawford's official truck, Attorney Morrison's sedan, and Dr. Whitfield's Mercedes. The convergence of these three figures, each carrying evidence that would reshape the entire conflict, created a moment of suspended tension that had the gathered media crews instinctively raising their cameras. Ridge positioned himself on the front porch between the approaching adults and his family, his golden eyes alert but unafraid. Thunderstorm and Aspen flanked him like a living shield, their collective presence declaring that whatever happened next, it would happen to all of them together. The truth was about to transform everything, but first, it would have to survive the collision of law and love, justice and compassion, that was about to explode across their quiet neighborhood like a bomb made of revelation and redemption. Officer Jake Crawford stepped out of his vehicle with the weight of 5 years' worth of guilt and revelation pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. The media crews surged forward, expecting to document the dramatic seizure of an illegal exotic pet. But Crawford's expression held something they hadn't anticipated: the quiet determination of a man who had finally found a way to honor his son's memory. "Ladies and gentlemen," Crawford announced, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd with official authority, "I'm here to make a statement regarding the Ridge Torres case." The silence that fell over Maple Street was so complete that Ridge's rumbling purr could be heard from the front porch where he sat beside Ethel's wheelchair, his golden eyes fixed on the officer with calm intelligence. After extensive investigation and consultation with state wildlife authorities, Colorado Parks and Wildlife has determined that Ridge Torres poses no threat to public safety and will remain with his family under a permanent educational permit. Crawford's words hit the crowd like electricity, causing an eruption of cheers from supporters and angry protests from those who had expected justice to follow the letter of the law. But Crawford wasn't finished. Furthermore, our investigation has uncovered evidence of criminal activity related to Ridge's origin that will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Dr. Patricia Whitfield stepped forward, her daughter Emma holding tightly to her hand. The veterinarian's face was pale but resolute as she approached the microphones that had been thrust toward her. "I owe this family a public apology," she began, her voice shaking with emotion. "My complaints against Ridge were based on fear and manipulation, not facts. This animal saved my daughter's life, and I responded by trying to destroy his family. I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry." Emma broke free from her mother's grip and ran toward Ridge, throwing her small arms around his neck with the fearless affection of a child who had never doubted his gentleness. "Ridge is the goodest cat in the whole world," she declared to the cameras, her face shining with absolute conviction. The crowd's mood began to shift as Attorney Morrison approached the family with the sealed envelope that contained Clayton Torres's final letter. Michael's hands trembled as he opened the document that would determine their financial future, his voice breaking as he read his grandfather's words aloud. "The inheritance was never about following rules blindly," Michael read, tears streaming down his face. "It was about having the courage to do what's right, even when it costs you everything. You chose love over money, family over fortune. That choice proves you deserve both." Sarah collapsed against Michael's shoulder, overwhelmed by the realization that their 3 years of struggle had been a test they'd passed without even knowing they were being evaluated. The inheritance was theirs, all of it, because they had chosen Ridge over financial security. But the most powerful moment came when Crawford knelt in front of Ethel's wheelchair, his official composure finally cracking as he spoke directly to the elderly woman who had become Ridge's devoted grandmother. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "my son Tyler died trying to protect other children from a dangerous animal. He made the same choice your family has made, putting love and protection above personal safety. Ridge reminds me of Tyler's courage, and I won't dishonor my son's memory by punishing a family for showing the same bravery." Ethel reached out with a weathered hand to touch Crawford's face, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Honey, Love recognizes love. Your boy would be proud of the man you've become. The media crews captured every moment of the reconciliation, but the story had already transcended simple human interest. Ridge's case was becoming a symbol of something larger, the power of love to transcend species, law, and social boundaries. Frank Torres emerged from his garage apartment, moving slowly but purposefully toward the gathering. At 68, the Vietnam veteran had learned to recognize moments when history pivoted on individual choices. He had made the wrong choice decades ago when he abandoned his family. Now he watched his son make the right choice under impossible pressure. "Michael," Frank said, his voice carrying across the sudden quiet, "your grandfather would have been proud. You didn't just inherit his money, you inherited his character." The reconciliation between father and son, played out in front of cameras and crowds, added another layer of emotional resonance to a story that was already capturing hearts across the nation. 3 generations of Torres men, united by their love for a wild animal who had chosen to be domestic. Ridge seemed to sense that the crisis had passed, his body language relaxing as he moved from his protective position to greet Officer Crawford with curious friendliness. The sight of a 30-pound bobcat calmly accepting pets from the wildlife officer who had come to arrest him provided powerful visual evidence of Ridge's true nature. Dr. Whitfield approached Michael and Sarah with visible humility, her professional pride stripped away by the revelation of her ex-husband's crimes. "I've prepared a full medical examination of Ridge for your files," she said quietly. "And I'd like to volunteer as his veterinarian if you'll have me." The offer was more than professional courtesy. It was an attempt at redemption, a way to transform her campaign against Ridge into advocacy for his welfare. Emma's obvious love for Ridge had shown her mother that fear-based decisions rarely led to just outcomes. The crowd gradually dispersed as the drama resolved into something more like a celebration. Neighbors who had been afraid to openly support the family emerged from their houses, many bringing gifts for Ridge or food for the family that had weathered such public scrutiny. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly neighbor whose life Ridge had helped save during her heart attack, shuffled forward with tears streaming down her face. "That cat is an angel," she declared to anyone who would listen. "He howled until the whole neighborhood woke up when I collapsed in my garden. Without Ridge, I'd be dead." Tommy Chen, the 10-year-old who had started the #Save Ridge petition, presented the family with a scrapbook containing hundreds of supportive messages from children across the country. "Ridge is famous," Tommy announced proudly. "And now everyone knows cats and bobcats can be best friends." As the afternoon sun slanted through the trees lining Maple Street, the Torres family found themselves surrounded by a community that had rallied to protect one of their own. The inheritance that had seemed like salvation, then damnation, then salvation again, now felt less important than the wealth of relationships that had been forged in the crucible of crisis. Ridge, oblivious to his newfound celebrity status, had returned to his afternoon routine of supervising Thunder, Storm, and Aspen as they explored the backyard. His presence had transformed from a liability into an asset, his story inspiring legislation to create more humane pathways for wildlife rehabilitation and exotic animal permits. Ethel, her health stabilized now that the stress had lifted, sat on her front porch watching her unusual grandson play with his adoptive siblings. The woman who had spent 3 years fearing the knock on the door that would take Ridge away now found herself fielding requests for interviews about wildlife conservation and the power of interspecies love. "You know," she told Sarah as they watched Ridge demonstrate hunting techniques to the Maine Coons, "I always believed love doesn't need a license. Sometimes it just needs the courage to stand up and be counted." The educational permit that had once seemed like a compromise now opened doors to opportunities none of them had imagined. Schools across Colorado requested visits from Ridge and his family, eager to teach children about wildlife conservation through the lens of a success story rather than a cautionary tale. Michael's garage business, which had struggled for years, suddenly found itself flooded with customers who wanted to support the family that saved Ridge. The inheritance money would expand the business, hire employees, and secure their future. But it was the community support that truly enriched their lives. As the sun set over their small house on Maple Street, the Torres family gathered around their dinner table with 3 Maine Coons and 1 celebrity bobcat arranged around them like a living testament to the power of chosen family. Ridge's purr provided a bass note to the conversation, his golden eyes moving from face to face as if counting his blessings. "You know what the best part is?" Sarah said, watching Ridge gently headbutt Frank's hand in a gesture of pure affection. "We didn't save Ridge, he saved us." The wild heart that had never truly left Ridge had taught them all something profound, that love doesn't recognize the boundaries humans create, and that family is defined not by genetics, but by the willingness to stand together when the world says you should stand apart. In a world that often seemed divided by fear and misunderstanding, Ridge's story became a reminder that sometimes the most unlikely families create the strongest bonds, and that courage often looks like an elderly woman's hand resting protectively on a bobcat's head while the world watches and learns what love really means. At 76, Ethel Morrison discovered that the richest inheritance isn't money. It's the family that chooses you back. When her grandson Michael found a dying bobcat kitten named Ridge on a lonely Colorado highway, their struggling multi-generational household transformed into something extraordinary. For 3 years they loved fiercely and lived quietly until the world tried to tear them apart. Ridge wasn't just a rescued animal. He became the bridge between a Vietnam veteran seeking redemption, a couple grieving their childless marriage, and an elderly widow who'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed. When legal battles threatened to destroy everything, this unlikely family faced an impossible choice: financial security or unconditional love. Their decision reminds us that in our golden years, when children scatter like dandelion seeds and loneliness creeps in like winter cold, sometimes salvation comes with spotted fur and golden eyes. Ridge taught them that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up, staying loyal, and purring through the storms together. In a time when nursing homes warehouse our elders and families drift apart, Ridge's story whispers a beautiful truth. You're never too old to be chosen, to matter, to love something so completely that you'd risk everything to keep it safe. What unexpected family member has brought the most joy to your golden years? Have you ever had to choose between what's practical and what your heart knows is right? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how love found you when you needed it most.